Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. This video is going to be a tutorial on how to take star photographs such as this one right here. So I'm now going to show you guys how I did this. First step, we need to be outside. Right, so this is how I took the photograph of the cottage with the stars. This is how I did it, and this is how you could do it. Right, let's get started. So we'll look at the equipment first of all. I'll tell you what I'm using. Right, so as you can see, I'm using my Nikon D7000. This is the main camera that I use when I'm taking my images. So as you can see, I'm not using the standard lens either. I'm using an 18 to 105, not an 18 to 55, which is the standard lens that comes with this camera. I'd suggest using the lens where you've got as much angle as possible, so a wide angle lens or something of this sort. Your standard 18 to 55 lenses would do perfect as well, because obviously you want the wide shots to get as much sky in as you can, but if you wanted to do some detailed photographs of the stars, you can also just use the zoom and get that up to 55, and that'd be enough to capture the detail of the stars without having to change your lens over in the dark, which I can vouch for is a pain. I definitely suggest using a tripod, because these images could be as long as 20 seconds each, even longer if you really want to. The images that I'm going to try and show you how to take now are going to be the single stars and not the light trails. If you want light trails, you're probably best not watching this video, because this is all about trying to get the detail in the stars to make it look like you're seeing them for yourself as you are at the time. Another thing I suggest is a shutter release remote. Mine's for my Nikon. You would have to get one to be compatible with your camera, whatever it is. Now if you don't have a remote, don't fret, you can also use the self timer on your camera. The only reason that I'm telling you to use this is because when you take that shutter at 20 seconds, if you've got shutter shake, that could affect your image, whereas if you've got a remote control or anything of the such, which means that you're not touching the camera when you're releasing it, then means there's no shutter shake at all, and you're going to get a nice, clean, sharp image. Now, one of the main things you need to know about star photography is to take images of the stars, you need to be in an area with no light pollution whatsoever. So if you live in the city, or if you live in a town, or if you live in a village, anywhere, just try and get as far away as possible into the countryside as you can, where there's no lights at all, no street lights, nothing. So as soon as the sun goes down and the stars come out, it is pitch black, which then means your image taking will make everything so much easier. So the first thing is to get your equipment. The second thing is to find your location. I'm here on the Isle of Skye in Scotland for this video. So now we just have to wait for the sun to go down and the stars to come out, which I think will be around about now. Right, so now it's night time. All we need to do now is set our camera up and start taking some pictures. So let's go find somewhere. Right, so first thing is first, all we need to do is just turn our camera on and get it into the right location. So for now you don't have to worry about ISO, shutter speed, apertures, nothing like that. So get your tripod all set up nicely and then have a little look down your viewfinder. So for this image, I'm getting the cottage at the bottom and I'm going to have the stars at the top. So what you want to do to get your image perfect is you're going to want to, when you've turned your camera on, you're going to want to focus on the actual cottage or tree or whatever subject you're using. And to do that, you might need to actually have a torch with you. So for example, I've got my torch on top of my camera to show you what I'm doing, but you might want to bring a torch with you to then just shine on your subject, because obviously it's in the pitch black. Once you've shone that on your subject and you're not going to move your camera, you're going to then focus on that subject by looking down the camera. So if we just quickly focus onto the light part of the subject, for me it's going to be the porch. So if I just focus on the porch there, that's now focused. Now what you want to do is switch it from automatic to manual, and now you know that your cottage or subject or whatever you're taking is going to be in focus no matter what you do, as long as you don't move your tripod itself. Right, so we're going to get into the technical side of it now. So I'm going to be taking these photographs on 3.5 f-stop, which is going to be the lowest f-stop I can get it on. But since I'm using it at 3.5, it's going to be a big hole, which means more light's going to be able to pass through quicker, which means I won't need to use a high ISO or higher ISO or a longer shutter speed. So once I've got it on the 3.5, I want to be working on my ISO. Now ISO is a big thing for these photographs, is you don't want to be using the 100 ISO or 200 ISO or 300 or 400, you want to be using really high. For these shots I'm going to be using 1600. So I'll just quickly knock that onto 1600, and I'm using 1600 because that's what I've done before and I think it looks best. And with me having a subject in the bottom of my image, I don't want to put the ISO too high because you will get really bad grain in that subject with it being lit up perfectly, and the sky would look good, but the subject will look grainy pretty much. For example though, if you're just taking pictures of the sky and just the stars, you can use higher ISO and a smaller aperture or a smaller hole, so up to f-stop 22 if you really wanted to. So once I've done that, I want to now work on my shutter speed. Now I'm going to be taking these images on 20 seconds. Now for everything I'm saying here, f-stop, ISOs, shutter speeds, don't just do what I'm telling you. Put those settings into your camera maybe, but then work with them and change them and make it different, because that's the way you're going to learn. You're not going to learn from listening to me. You're going to learn from putting your ISO on, you're going to learn from putting your aperture on and your shutter speed and taking an image and realising it hasn't worked whatsoever, and you're going to change it. That's all you have to do. What you want to do is get out your shutter release button now, or turn your timer on, so when you take the image you're not going to be shutter shaking like I was talking about earlier. So what I'm going to do now is I've got it on my remote setting, I've got all my settings done and everything. I'm going to take a quick test shot, and to do that I'm going to have to turn this light off. So now you should be able to see just how dark it actually is out here with that light switched off. So I'm going to take my picture now, so 20 seconds. So what we have there is a lovely lit sky. All of the light in the house is shining through nicely to make that cottage look nice and warm. But the outside of the cottage itself is really dark. So we've got our sky shot, we've got the stars in there, it looks really nice, but what we don't have in there is a light cottage or anything in the foreground lit up. So how do we do that? What I do is I use my torch, like I'm going back to from earlier. Be able to see there how I'm moving the torch backwards and forwards on the cottage, and this is essentially painting with light. So now I'm going in from star photography to painting with light, so it's quite a lot in one little video, so please bear with me. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to just quickly breeze it across like that, just once, and then turn it off for the next part of the exposure. And what that does is that'll paint all this cottage nice and light, but keep all the sky nicely exposed as well. So we're gonna hit the shutter like that, and all we're gonna do now is just paint across the scene with our light like so, and take it off the other side, turn our torch off because we don't want it to overexpose or anything. So now what we're doing is we're letting the light from the stars reach the camera sensor via letting it having a longer shutter, like so. And now, as you'll be able to see with the photograph that I'm going to put next to it, you can see that you've got a perfectly lit cottage and the sky itself still looks magnificent with stars and everything, and all that's done via painting with light, a long shutter speed, a high ISO, and whatever else you want to work with. So you might want to actually experiment with this technique and see if it works for you. It's worked for me, it's absolutely brilliant, and I'm going to show you now what I did in post-production to get the image to look like the image that I first showed you. Right, so the first thing I've done was opened up this image in Photoshop. As you can see, the image is raw, so that's why it's opening up in Camera Raw 6.7.1 with my Nikon D7000. If you haven't got RAW, don't worry about it. You can do most of these things in Photoshop itself. You might just have to look at some other tutorials to find out how to get into contrasts and clarity and everything like that. But for this tutorial, I am going to be using Camera Raw, which is a part of Photoshop. I'm using Photoshop CS5, which is one of the older versions, so I'm not using the newest version. So most of the things you can do in this version, though, you can do in the newer version, so please bear with me. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up this image like I have done here, and I'm going to work on the side bits over here, which it says basic. So what I like to do over here is work on the contrast, brightness, blacks, fill light, recovery and exposure. What I like to do here is just sort of work from slider to slider. So as you can see from the contrast here, you can just sort of slide it backwards and forwards and it'll give you a different effect. What I like to do is, with my star images, is just put a little bit of contrast in there, so maybe around about 43. Whatever you want to do with your images, just slide it along and see when it looks nice. But obviously if you go too contrasty, you can see how dark it's gone around the edges of the house here and how it doesn't look as good. In my opinion anyway, you might like that. So for this image I went for 43. I'll quickly go through all these settings now to show you what I've been doing with my images, just so it might help you if you're doing your images. With the brightness I just like to leave that as it is, because the exposure we did properly when we did it with our torch. That's the whole point of using the torch, to get the exposure correct beforehand. The blacks I like to bring down a little bit, just by 2 stops, and all that does there is brings out the sky very slightly, because now you can see a little bit more in detail of the sky. Very subtle though. And fill light I bring up to number 7-ish, 10. I think I'll leave it about 7, and the fill light just brings in all the detail around here, so it kind of looks like it's being lit from behind, like the sky, like there's light pollution over there, but in fact you are just filling the light in around the actual cottage itself, bringing the stars out. Recovery is a big thing for this image. I like to bring the recovery right the way up, because with the recovery is, if you look into the actual light of the building here, so into the rooms, if you watch me when I slide this up to the top, you can see the detail just kind of comes back in those areas. It's very subtle, like I said, but it is a good thing to make sure you do. And like I said, with the exposures, we've just got that already set up anyway, because that's how we did it on the camera. So like I said, it's really quick and easy, the things that I do with my images. I don't like to manipulate them too much, but obviously you want to bring the clarity out slightly, and I like to do this just for the fact that you can bring a bit more detail in the stars via bringing out your clarity, but you don't want to go too high with your clarity, because if you bring your clarity up too much, your actual building itself will start to look a little bit grainy, because obviously we're using high ISOs, and we're using 1600 ISOs. Well, I use 1600 ISO, sorry. So if you look here, you can kind of see the grain coming in, and if we pull that clarity all the way up, it kind of gets a bit stronger. Very slightly brings it out as stronger, but I'm not too fond of the graininess in the images, especially in like the actual grass area here. So I'll bring the clarity out just about 33, and then from that we can work on the sharpness. Now the sharpness is where you'll get the grain you see coming in. So if I bring the sharpness all the way up, you can see how grainy that is there. So if we just bring the sharpness up slightly, and also if we just bring a little bit of this up here to reduce the noise in there, which I like to do, so bring that up to about there, that just makes it a little bit smoother. So then if we come all the way up here to the sky, you can still see that you've got that clarity in the sky, and you can still see all these stars. Back to full view for you. So as you can see there, you've got now a nice sky, a nice bottom, but as you can see, this green grass where we've lit the torch up just looks a little bit too unreal for me, and it looks far too like heavy. So what I'm going to do now is come up to here where you've got your graduated filters, and I'm going to just click at the bottom down here, right click, hold shift to make sure that it's straight. As you can see, it comes around in like 90-degree angles and stuff, so I'll bring that from the bottom there and just bring that up slightly just so it covers the grass like that. And obviously you don't want it this green, so we're just going to go over here to the exposure and bring the exposure down slightly, not so much that it looks like the house is just being lit up by some sort of weird illumination. We're going to bring it up to around about, just about there, and we're going to bring that contrast down a little bit, because we don't need that much contrast in the bottom of the grass. And obviously just work with it, like the saturation, we don't need the grass to be that light. You can bring that down, because obviously the main subject here is the cottage and the stars itself. You don't want people to be looking at the image and instantly be looking at the grass because it's so bright. So I want to once again bring the clarity down a little bit there as well, because you don't want it too grainy in the bottom parts. So that'll do for me there, and if we just hit a new one right here, we can put a new grad filter in at the top. So same again, right click, hold shift, and drag that one down. And what we're going to do here is bring the exposure up slightly, and that's just going to bring out a little bit more of the sky. So as you can see there, now it's all purpley, so we'll bring it down a little bit less than that to make it a little bit darker. And with this, I'm going to put a little bit more contrast in the image and pull a little bit of that saturation out, just so you get the nice colour in the sky. Obviously, to our naked eye, it is black as black, but for an image, too much black for me just puts it off, sets it off. You can obviously make this as low as you want if you want it nice and black, but for me, if you bring the colour out, it makes the stars pop a lot more. So with that, I'd now say that that image was quite good and quite fancy, and it's done the job. I wanted a picture of a cottage with the stars in the background, and it's done the job. This is showing you exactly what I saw. So that's been the tutorial there. I just wanted to let you know how I take my photographs of the stars and how I've done it. Obviously it's a technique that has worked for me. It might not work for you, but hopefully it will. So please get yourselves out there and just start taking the images. And if you've enjoyed doing it, please let me know and send me some of your images, because that'd be great to look at. You can find all the links to my social media down below, my Instagram, my Twitter and my Facebook. You can also find me on my website, jackboothbyphotography.com, and just send me a quick message with it attached, and I'd love to take a look at them. If you have any more questions, just leave a comment down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.